heretics crave the cleansing fire of absolution. They need not fear, for we shall deliver it to them.
Welcome back to the channel, new friends. Today's video is the first request video by a longtime friend and supporter of mine, Rachel Ray Ray. This is also a re-upload because I fucked up the audio the first go around, and when it's a request for a friend, especially one like her, we're not going to let it go down like that. So, this lore vid is on the Imperium's Nuns with Guns, the Adepta Sororitas. Before we dive between those power armored thighs and get to the lore, do me a solid, make sure to hit those like and sub buttons to make this your safe place, and with that out of the way, let's get to it. The first thing to address is that the Sisters of Battle aren't a part of the Adeptus Astartes, because that's an old boys club and girls were blessed by Papa Nurgle with hyper cootie coochies, or so they say. As we jokingly say, nuns with guns, that's actually a literal joke because the sisters fall under the authority of the Adeptus Ministorum, better known as the Ecclesiarchy, because no matter which name you choose for most things in Warhammer, whether it be the official name or the common name, the writers just really hate people with dyslexia and any kind of speech impediment. They're the army of the Ecclesiarchy though, so hence the literal joke, nuns with guns. And we love them for it, judging by all the Rule 34 that exists. Also of note is not to confuse the Adepta Sororitas with the Sisters of Silence, as while the Sisters of Battle had their origin in the 36th millennium, the Sisters of Silence have been around since the late 30th millennium, and are basically just specialized witch hunters who fall under the Departamento Investigatis of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. See, I told you the writers hate people with speech impediments. Let's turn back the clock a bit though, from the current setting to the 36th millennium, a time known as the Age of Apostasy. Back then, the Sororitas had started out on a planet named San Lior, and had the name Daughters of the Emperor. They had gained a reputation of not just devout servants of the Emperor, who devoted themselves in perpetuity to him, but they were also unrivaled warriors. These whispers caught the attention of a total shitheel named Goj Vandire. If you don't know who that is, I'll do a quick overview. Vandire was the master of the Administratum, having bribed, tortured, assassinated, and any other method possible to get him to that position. He also managed to install a puppet as the head of the Ecclesiarchy. That was, of course, until he had no further use for the poor bastard, and pulled a coup, which ended in a straight-up execution. Thus, Vandire gathered up all the cardinals he'd been bribing, which was more than enough to scare the rest whom he hadn't assassinated, and got himself declared the new Ecclesiarch. So now you've got a man who's the head of not just the Administratum, but also the Ecclesiarchy. He was at the time the most powerful human in the Imperium of Man. So when Van Douche found out about the Daughters of the Emperor, he saw in them devout soldiers who'd be at his whim. All it would take is a little convincing. So he hopped aboard a starship and went to San Lior with the ridiculous retinue, rolling out the red carpet of blitzkrieg pomp, circumstance, and cringe when he arrived. When Van Dunce and his menagerie of yes-men reached the Daughters' convent, it was found to be boarded up and set for a siege. Only the gatekeeper spoke and straight up said, if you aren't the Emperor, we don't want a damn thing to do with your crusty ass. While the Vandire's people nearly lost their minds in expectation for the place to be rage-bombed out of existence, Vandire was oddly and scarily calm. Instead of lashing out as expected, he simply asked if he'd be granted permission to enter with a minimal bodyguard to prove that he spoke with the authority of the Emperor of Mankind in totality. So, of course, these silly scions accepted this request, allowing Van creep into their main courtyard where he set up a spectacle, holding his Rosarius and making claim that he'd prove to have the Emperor's grace. If he were lying, he'd die on the spot, and thus the gambit was set, when Van Winkle ordered one of his bodyguards to shoot him in the heart with his las pistol. It did take some convincing, because the bodyguard didn't want to be the one to slay his master, but with some coaxing it happened, and thus a white light blinded all in the courtyard briefly. Once their eyes adjusted, they'd see Van Jesus standing there, completely unharmed, which caused all the women to fall to the ground and immediately swear fealty to the High Lord. Fact of the matter is, Van Jesus was a Van Fraud, and his Rosarius was a shield generator, which is what really protected him, but unfortunately, no one fucking knew what a personal shield generator was, which led to Daughters of the Emperor swearing fealty, and Van Creep showing why I gave him that nickname, as he had the women change their name from Daughters to Brides of the Emperor. And yeah, it gets about as bad as you imagine a dusty old ego-tripping psychopath could make it. On top of that, they became his personal bodyguard and army and harem, being clad in the finest power armor and equipped with the finest weapons and training that limitless resources could provide. I'll skip the rest of Ghost Van Ducktard because he'll get his own video in the future on the Age of Apostasy and his reign of blood. The next important thing that happens with the Sisters of Battle, while still going under the name Brides of the Emperor, is when, being as no one can get by them to kill Van Creep because he's got them so gaslit and brainwashed, his bullshit and fuckery finally came to an end when Praetorian Longinus of the Adeptus Custodes, personal bodyguard to the Emperor of Mankind himself, showed up to find the leader of the Brides of the Emperor, Alicia Dominica, and the other leaders of Van Creep's bodyguard. It was then Alicia Dominica and the others were taken by Praetorian Longinus to stand before the Golden Throne in audience with the Emperor of Mankind. It isn't written down or said anywhere exactly what happened during this meeting, but the aftermath sure as shit is recorded and is a chef's kiss of an ending to the story of Mr. Creepy White Van Creep. As the Brides of the Emperor marched themselves back to find the prick with one hell of a purpose, they found him ranting and raving like the utter madman he'd become. Alicia Dominica delivered one of the most badass speeches in Warhammer lore before canceling Van Creep's subscription to life, which our special guest will read for you now.
You have committed the ultimate heresy. Not only have you turned your back on the Emperor and stepped from his light, you have profaned his name and almost destroyed everything he has striven to build. You have perverted and twisted the path he has laid for mankind to tread. As your decrees have stated, there can be no mercy for such a crime, no pity for such a criminal. I renounce your lordship. You walk in the darkness and cannot be allowed to live. Your sentence has been long overdue, and it is now time for you to die.
After this display of badassery, the Brides of the Emperor took up their former name, Daughters of the Emperor. The new leader of the ecclesiarchy came up with a new law called the Decree Passive, which banned the Ministorum from controlling any men under arms, basically banning them from having an army. But we all know how much fun it is to find loopholes in laws. So of course the ecclesiarchy skirted around this decree by recruiting the Daughters of the Emperor, because they were women, not men, with an all-female membership because of the aforementioned hyper-cootie coochies gifted to them by Pappy Nurgle. The only thing left to do now was change their name again before the ink dried, being bestowed with the name the Orders Militant of the Adepta Sororitas, colloquially known as the Sisters of Battle. Once the Adepta Sororitas was officially created, Alicia Dominica, along with Sylvana, Mina, Lucia, Catherine, and Arabella, whom are the sisters that had joined Alicia before the Golden Throne, went out into the galaxy for a few different flavors of Wars of Faith, something I nearly forgot to mention. When the Age of Apostasy came to an end, the Adepta Sororitas wasn't the only new organization created. Another was the Ordo Hereticus, which was initially created by the Inquisition to make damn sure that a shitstorm like the Age of Apostasy couldn't happen again. Although, as all things created for one simple purpose in the Imperium do, that original mission expanded from dealing with only doctrinal heresy against the Imperial Creed to encompass genetic and psychic divergence from baseline humanity among the Imperial population, basically hardcore racism against anything that wasn't a baseline human. These poor bastards are usually classified as adhumans, things like mutants, ogrins, squats, navigators, etc., etc. Two organizations together as such. Being as we're all caught up to the current timeline with the sisters' history, let's talk about one of the sisters who's been mentioned many times thus far, Alicia Dominica, founder of the Adepta Sororitas, patron saint of the sisterhood, bearer of the Grail of Ages, executioner of the heretical false prophet Ghost Van Dire, and founder of the Order of the Ebon Chalice. Given that quote read earlier by the wonderful Rachel Ray Ray was so damn good, you get to hear it again because I'm a generous prick.
You have committed the ultimate heresy. Not only have you turned your back on the Emperor and stepped from his light, you have profaned his name and almost destroyed everything he has striven to build. You have perverted and twisted the path he has laid for mankind to tread. As your decrees have stated, there can be no mercy for such a crime, no pity for such a criminal. I renounce your lordship. You walk in the darkness and cannot be allowed to live. Your sentence has been long overdue, and it is now time for you to die.
After drawing her power sword, holding it aloft for all to see and letting the reality of what was about to transpire sink in, Van Dummy's last words were, "I don't have time to die, I'm too busy," before being decapitated in one precise swing of Alicia's power sword. Saint Alicia Dominica went on to do many great things in the name of the Imperium, being at the head of many wars of faith and creating her own order, thus becoming the first canoness to the Order of the Ebon Chalice. Saint Dominica fell in the Battle of Freedswide's world in the year 650 of the 36th millennium, having survived one hell of a battle, which will get its own video probably. That is, of course, until she took a lasgun to the heart from a traitor. After falling in battle, she was canonized as a saint of the imperial cult by the ecclesiarchy she'd served for so long. Bolter Bitches comes to an end. Please let me know if you'd like to see a part 2, which I'll wind up doing in the future anyway, because of fan service. For most of the topics I cover this early in the channel's history, I'll wind up doing more parts on everything. Do tell if you have a favorite Sororitas, whether it be a member or a moment, and I hope this video eased your day a bit. Let's have Ray Ray take us out with one more quote from Abbess Helena, and a big thank you to Ray for doing the voice lines of our wonderful Bolter Bitches. I'll see you in the next one.
Many claim they wish to destroy their enemies. If this were true, most would be compelled to destroy themselves.